Okay, and let's make a start for today. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the teacher trainers here at National Geographic Learning, and welcome to another National Geographic Learning Asia webinar. So today, we're going to be taking a look at reading specifically. And our topic for today, as it says here, is keeping it real. And we're going to be talking about some tips for teaching reading. So what do we mean by keeping it real? Well, one of the things with teaching is that teaching, like many subjects, operates on theories, right? There are a lot of theories and ideas in the background. And sometimes we try to use those ideas, but they're a little bit too theoretical, a little bit too hard to grasp and figure out, how do I deliver this in my classroom? I know this quite well because some of you may know my degree is in physics. Okay, I studied physics at university. I have a master's degree in laser physics. There are a lot of theories, but the question is, how do you apply those theories to the real world, right? In something like physics. Teaching is not much different, right? There are a lot of theories out there, and we need to figure out a way we can make these things practical, how we can keep things real, okay? So that's what we're doing in this short series here. We're trying to let everybody see some ideas that maybe you've heard of or thought about, and you're like, how do I use these in my classroom, right? So we're going to try and keep it real for you all as we go through here. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'll go through 5 tips. So the first one is about building vocabulary for reading. That's a very important part. Okay. Second one is developing reading skills and strategies, which are useful as well. Okay. The third one is how to ask good questions. Okay. Now that could be during reading comprehension. You could also apply this to other parts of lessons as well. But in terms of reading, often it's to do with comprehension of the reading, or also how to extend the reading into other parts of the lesson or other ideas. Okay. The fourth one is about connecting reading and the things we experience to real world ideas and experiences that the students themselves have. Okay. And the last one is going slow to go fast. I'll explain what I mean by that later. Okay. But when I'm going through these ideas today, as I go through some examples, the examples I will be using are young learner and teenager examples. But I hope if some of you are teaching older students, that you will be able to apply these to your older students, maybe university age students as well. Okay. So on that note, I'd like to find out a little bit about who's here and what you teach. So maybe I can help make it a little more relevant. So on the screen now, you should be able to see a poll. Just one question, just which segments do you teach? You can select more than one and then submit when you're done. I just kind of want to see how many people are here, since I chose young learners and teens mainly for today for the examples. We'll see how that relates to our audience here. So I'll just give you another 5 seconds or so. We've got like 60% of people answered, which is a good statistically representative sample. There we go, that'll do. So if I just share the results real quick, here on the screen, you can see young learners, 46%, teenagers, 58%. So most of you are teaching young learners or teens, but I can see a lot of university and adult student teachers here as well. So that's really great, some very young learners too. Okay. For the very young learners, of course, they're developing a lot of reading skills from a very basic level. They're developing basic literacy. So the ones that may of these 5 points that may relate most to you today, if you're teaching very young learners, are the last 3, okay, numbers 3, 4, and 5. The first 2 probably don't apply so much to very young learners, but the last 3 still can, okay? So just take that, keep that in mind as we go. Okay, so let's get in and take a look at the first point. Now, I said there were 5, but actually I'm going to start with tip 0, okay? So tip 0, know your students. What do I mean by know your students? What do I mean by the picture on the screen? In the chat box, what's going on here? What do you think I mean by all of this? What do I mean by know your students, and what does this picture represent? Levels, yeah. What else? Knowing their strengths and weaknesses, yeah. Their background, their proficiency level, good, yeah, nice. Yeah, their learning needs, okay. Yeah, benchmarking, yeah, okay, cool. Diagnosing your students. Okay, good. So you've got a lot of different things here. I often use this particular picture to represent the idea of scaffolding. Okay, if you think up here on the top of the scaffold here, whoa, excuse me. I did not want to write for me today. I need to select a pen, that's why. There we go. So maybe here we've got the teacher and this is the student down here. And the idea is that obviously students will move up one step at a time, up this ladder, up this as they're learning, right? And we need to know where our students are at, what ladder, what step on the ladder they're actually on, right? And the other thing we need to do is as we move through and we're teaching them, I often think of teaching as I+1. Every day, this is where my students are at, and this is what I'm adding to them today. I'm not doing +10, that's too much, right? That's too much, they can't absorb that, right? So +1. So for all of my students as well, the question is, how much is +1? How much can they handle, right? So by knowing my students, I know what they're capable of, where they're at, what they're capable of doing next, and then I can plan the progression of their learning. So knowing your students is really important. So as we go through this, just remembering that every class is different, okay? Some of the things I talk about today, you might be thinking, maybe I can't use those in my class. My class isn't quite like Andrew's class, right? But you can still think about how can you modify that idea or take the core concept of that idea and still apply it to your class, okay? So just keep that in mind as we're going through here today and thinking about knowing your own students and what's going to work for your own students. Okay, great. So number one, this is probably the one question I get asked most about teaching reading, okay? What if my students don't know all the words, okay? Or the other way people ask that question is they will say to me, if my students don't know words in the reading, should I just read through the reading and when we get to that word, we stop and we explain that word, okay? And then we keep reading, okay? Is that a way to deal with it, right? And I feel from my own experiences and from what I've studied and read, that it's better to pre-teach or review vocabulary before we even look at the reading passage, okay? Opening up people's minds and getting their schema organized to be able to, work with the vocabulary, go over the meaning quickly in their head so that they're ready to comprehend it when they read is usually more important. We do that before, not during the reading, because during reading, there's a lot of other things going on, okay? So try and do these things before is the suggestion, okay? So what I do when I'm teaching reading, and it doesn't matter what I'm teaching, I'll give you an example in a moment, I will look at the reading and not just consider what the textbook tells me about new vocab, but I will look at the reading and say, what are all the words that my students might not know? Okay, again, know my students, right? So maybe they don't know this word. Maybe let me check this one again today and so on, right? And I'll go through and I'll construct a list of words, okay? I'll also look at what words in the reading have great importance. What are some key words that really matter in this reading, okay? And then what I will do is I'll make sure to review those as part of my lesson. So I will quickly review them or teach them if they're new before we even really look at the reading too much, okay? So let me give you a little bit of an example of how I would do that. So I'm going to look at this particular reading. You can see the reading on the left side of the screen image here. This is from a program called Look Level 4. So the students who would be doing this program, usually they'd be about 9 years old, something like that, okay? 9 or maybe 10. If they're doing this kind of material. And so if you're talking on a CEFR scale, there'd be A2, high A2, maybe starting to get a little bit towards B1 on CEFR scale if you work with CEFR, okay? So we've got a reading here. Now, as you can see on the reading, I haven't blown it up so you can really read it yet, but you can see the picture, right? You can see that this is in Dubai. It's one of those famous islands that they've built in Dubai. And so this is what the reading is going to be about, okay? So as I go through this, what I want to do is I want to look and see what this reading's about a little bit, okay? But then as I'm going through and building up to that, I'm going to be using words from other parts of the unit to help me get my students ready. So this is a page from the very beginning of the unit, which we've already seen in class. And what we might say is we might say, okay, what words do we see here on the page? Like if you just look at this image, what words do we see? What do we see here? So in the chat box, give me some words. What can you see? Incredible, that's a nice word. It's an incredible view. Excuse my quick writing. Cave, nice. Okay, a hiker, cool, or an explorer or somebody. What else have we got? It's cool, maybe. A canyon, okay. Okay, lots of words, right? Lots of different words. Now, there's a few other ones I might want to specifically pick out for my students here. I might want to pick out the word sand. It looks like I've got some sand kind of flowing off the rock there, okay? So as I do this, usually I'm going to suggest some words to the students as well, because I know these words are coming up, okay? In this one, what sort of words have we got here? Now, in this one, we've got some words that we're teaching as part of the vocabulary of this unit. So here you can see words like cave. So we've got cave here. We've got desert. We've got island, wave, rock, plant, bridge. And the reason I'm circling those particular ones is because those 7 words, I can refer to them in the topic of the reading. Okay, the words castle, jungle, and pyramid, not so much, right? But those 7 that I circled there are going to come up in the reading. So I'm going to make sure to go over them again, and I'm going to write them down over here. I've already got cave. Let's put on island. Let's just do one more. Let's put on rock. Okay, and so I'm just adding to my list of words. Now, just so you know, I'm writing these down for you, but this is actually what I do in my classroom as well. Okay, what I do is, if this is my whiteboard, or whatever I'm using to put things up on the screen with, what I'll do is, just like I've done here, I'll keep like maybe 1/3 of my board off to the side here, usually on the right-hand side, because I'm right-handed. It's just the way I usually work. And what I do is I note any of these words here, right? So that my students can see the words. They have a reference for those words. Maybe as we're going through these, we might even draw some little pictures to help represent what these words mean, okay? You know, sand, little bits of whatever it is, just to give the students another visual clue, just depending on what they need, right? Knowing my students, yeah? But I usually just keep this list on the side of the board, and I never erase it. It just stays there the entire lesson, okay? And this is a way my students can keep referring back, okay? So if I come down here, now, before we do the reading, again, we're going to look at the picture and we're going to see, what do we see here? And my students might not know another way to describe this. They might just say plant, right? Which was one of the words we had earlier, right? So let's put on plant here, okay? We've got the ocean, for example, here in the background, right? We've got a lot of different words that we can refer to, okay? So before we go into the reading, I'm always going to go over with the students and go through the vocabulary, okay? Now, the question is, how much do you teach the vocabulary? How much do you actually instruct them in what those words mean? And the way I would do it is I would do it with some just very simple questions if they're review words. And if not, I would just give a very quick example, right? So cave, my students should know that one. So I might just say, inside a cave, is it light or dark? Can you see or not see? And my students should say not see, right? Is it usually hot or cold? And they'd go, oh, it's usually cold. And what? Give me an animal that lives in there. And they might say a bat, right? So because of the answers to their questions, I know that they understand what a cave is, okay? If they're giving me the right kinds of answers, okay? For another one, maybe a word like island, maybe this is a new word, okay? If I have to teach them an island. So what is an island? They might say, okay, an island is a piece of land, and then around it is just water, right? Lots of water, okay? So maybe, do you live on an island? So I live on the island of Taiwan, for example. And so you can talk about maybe islands in your area, right? But as long as the students get the basic idea, we don't need to do too much. It's just get the basic idea of what the word means, okay? Basic comprehension. And then we get ready to move on, okay? Great. Okay, now this is the actual reading. And the reason I wanted to just show you a little bit more about the reading is here you can see in this one, it has some bolded words, okay, that we want to make sure the students understand, okay? But what other words in this reading do you think students might have difficulty with? They're like 9 years old, doing English for 3 or 4 years. What sort of words might be new or difficult for them? So I'll give you an example. Dubai and United Arab Emirates. Those are words that my students probably don't know, right? So I need to teach those ones, right? What else do you think? What other ones do you think maybe? Space, yeah. And not just space, but I would say space to live, because we're not talking outer space, right? We're talking space to live, right? Space on the ground. So I'd probably teach that phrase, space to live, right? Okay. What else? Yeah, down here we've got words like sandboarding and snowboarding. Okay, do the students know what those are? They probably don't, right? I probably have to teach, before we look at the reading, what the word snowboarding is. Okay, so how would I teach that? Maybe I'd be like, okay, so have you ever seen anyone do this? Where they have this thing and this thing on their foot like that, and then they have one of these with like a stick, and then they have another one. Oh, it's kind of a weird stick. And then they have another one over here, another stick, and they go like this on the snow. Does anyone know that? And my students might say, yes, okay, whatever, right? And I say, okay, so this one is like there are two things on your feet, right? But there's another one where you can do no poles, take these ones away, and you can do it like this with one thing, okay, on the snow, okay? And this one is snowboarding, okay? So I just really quickly teach them what snowboarding is. Maybe they've seen a picture, maybe they haven't. I don't want to waste too much time, right? But then sandboarding, what do we think sandboarding is? Oh, it's like on the sand, I guess. Okay, cool, right? Yeah, so we can do that kind of way of quickly teaching some vocab. It doesn't have to be deep, just enough to understand the phrases, right? Other ones maybe my students don't know are palm trees. Here's palm trees. Maybe the word huge I want to focus on, right? Like big, bigger, huge, ginormous, right? Things like that. Maybe thousands of kilometers, someone said earlier as well. Okay. Things like that, right? These are different words or phrases that I might want to pre-teach before we even look at the reading, okay? So my main point here is, before you do the reading, make sure you go over as many of those words as you can. You might think it's going to take some time. I consider it an investment, okay? I'm investing time in teaching the vocabulary before, so that my reading goes more effectively afterwards. My students aren't stopping me, they're not confused. I'm not having to re-explain things, okay? So I consider teaching the vocabulary before as an investment in the reading, okay? Might take me 5 or 10 minutes, but if it makes my reading 5 or 10 minutes faster, then I've balanced that out, right? So it's an investment, okay? Good. Okay, so that's tip 1, is building vocab before reading, okay? Second one, let's take a look at the next tip. So developing skills and strategies, right? Now, I often, again, get the question, what sort of skills and strategies should we teach when we're reading? Because there are a lot, right? And also how to teach some of those strategies, right? So here's examples of some strategies, okay? Skimming and scanning, predicting, identifying, text features, main idea, purpose of the writing, inference, looking at details and points, things like that, right? What are some other ones that aren't on this list? What other ones can you think of? What are some other ones that are not there that you can think of? Did I pick all the easy ones? Guessing meaning, yeah, that's a good one. So guessing meaning of a word from context, right? That's a good one. Annotation, yeah. It's a bit more of an advanced skill for students. Yep, tone and mood, that's a good one. Okay, monitoring for understanding. Okay, so just general comprehension. Good. Inference we've got there. Connecting, yeah, so I could also tie that maybe in with compare and contrast, right? Compare, contrast, and connect. Okay, all of those things could go together as a strategy, right? Another one could be, what words did the author use and why did they use them? What's their word choice here? Why did they use that word, right? Things like that. Referencing, yeah, nice, good. So you've got a lot there. There are a lot of these things, I can't spell today, referencing, right? There are a lot of different skills and strategies, okay? And the question is, how do you teach them, right? How do we actually use them? Now, I'm sure you've heard the saying, practice makes you perfect. I expand on it a little bit. Plenty of practice makes you more perfect. It is a long road to get good at all of the different skills and strategies involved in reading. You need to do practice to get better and better over time. You need lots and lots of practice. It's not something you teach once and then your students will know and remember, okay? It doesn't work that way, right? So the way you really have to deal with skills and strategies is try working with one. The students will get some bits of it right. They'll figure out a little bit of it. And then later we can try again and they will get better. And then we try again. It's just learning, right? It's just the more we do it, the better we get, right? So that's pretty much the way you have to do it. So definitely do some sort of skill and strategy with every reading. You may want to do a small number and focus a little more. You may want to do a little bit on several skills and strategies. So let's quickly summarize just that piece. Let's look at that one word choice, right? You could do it like that as well, okay? But there's a lot of things you can do with any reading, okay? And then I would always do skills and strategies, even if they're not part of the actual lesson according to the teacher's book or the student book. Okay, so if I give you an example of that, here's a reading. This is a different one. It's from a teens program called Time Zones. The students level 2, they might be like 13, something like that, 13, 14 years old. Okay, unusual commutes is the topic, right? Now, in this one, you can see here that there are a couple of skills and strategies built into this first page. Here we've got look at the title and photos and scanning. Okay, so those are 2 strategies. Okay, to determine what's going on in the reading. Here in the other parts of the student book with this reading, you can also see there are several ideas that are built around strategies and skills on the actual reading exercises as well. So we've already got some of these things in here. I'm definitely going to be using these, but I can also do more. I can add in other little pieces as I'm going to help my students practice something they need. Okay, so if we look at this one, let's think. So what do we see if we were to look at this before we read? What can we see here on the page? What's interesting and useful here? Well, the first one is there's captions. So maybe it said in the activity at the top of the page, look at the title, look at the photos. It didn't say look at the captions, right? So what information can we get from looking at the captions? Now, why is oh, come on. Why is it doing this? Sorry, my cursor's gone crazy. There we go, that's better. Here's the captions, right? So what information can we get out of the captions? Okay, well, one thing is there are 2 photos from 2 different places. One's in Colombia, one's in Indonesia, right? 2 different things here, okay? One is a zip line across a river valley, okay? The other one is crossing a bridge. Okay, so they're both crossing areas. The photos as well as the captions tell us we're crossing to get somewhere, right? And both of the captions say it's children. Okay, so that kind of confirms what's in the picture as well. Okay, so there's bits of information we can get out of this, right? Okay, then as we go through, we've got 4 paragraphs in the reading, right? So let's take a quick look at a paragraph one at a time and think about a skill or a strategy that we could use with that paragraph. So here's the first paragraph. Okay, and if I said, okay, as we read that paragraph, what do we think? What can we predict that the rest of this reading is going to be about? Okay, what's your prediction? Okay, so in the chat box, give me a prediction. What are we going to be reading about today? The ways kids go to school. Okay, cool. And not just the ways kids normally go to school, but here it says unusual commutes, right? Now, anytime I get my students to do a prediction, I'm going to ask them why, right? So that word unusual commutes is important, right? Also, we're talking about children. We're talking about going to school. So I think we're going to find out maybe a couple of ways students get to school in unusual ways. Maybe that's the prediction, right? Unusual ways of traveling from, yeah, okay. Okay, cool. So prediction, nice, easy one. It's not in the book, but we can do it, right? Here's the second one, and I'll let you read it by yourself. But for this one, I might say, okay, one of the strategies we can think about is cause and effect. Okay, cause and effect. So, for example, what's the effect when the weather is wet or dry in these 2 in this paragraph, right? So when the weather is dry, what's the effect? And when the weather is wet, what's the effect? Okay. And if you read the paragraph, you can find out that when it's wet, the students don't use the zip line because it's unsafe. Okay. And so, okay, so there's some sort of choice that's going to be made there, right? A cause and effect. Yeah. Wet equals rain day equals no school. Camille, good job. Or maybe they're at home. Maybe they still have to do online school. I don't know, right? Anyway. Okay. You can see here it only says 11 families. I don't know if they shut the whole school for the day just because these 11 families worth of children can't get to school. Maybe they do. I don't know. Okay, let's look at the next one. So this paragraph is talking about the second photo. And again, I'll let you have a quick read of it by yourself. But in here, I could say, okay, let's compare and contrast, use that strategy, these two paragraphs, right? What is the same about what's going on here and what is different between these two things, right? So yeah, how learners have some challenges getting to school. They need some remote learning to avoid the bridge, or maybe, I don't know. I'm pretty sure these photos are pre-pandemic, okay? But what else? What else? What other things compare and contrast? Weather affects the school days. Yeah, good, Marco, right? So we could say. One thing we could say is maybe the things to compare, things that are the same, is both of these students have a trip to school. It's a little bit unusual. Is it a little bit dangerous as well? You could say there's a little bit of danger here, right? And in both cases, we could say the students have a choice, okay? And the first one is choose to use the zip line or not. And the second one is choose to use the broken bridge or choose to go further and use a safe bridge, right? But yeah, both of these things are talking, as Angelito says, about obstacles going to school. But it's also interesting looking at how things are different as well. So I guess it doesn't matter whether it's raining or if it's not raining, the Indonesian children, maybe they still use the bridge, even the broken bridge, even if it's raining, I guess. I'm not sure, right? Do they? Okay. The difference also might be, in Colombia, is the zip line and that river canyon ever going to change? Probably not, right? However, they may fix the bridge in Indonesia and then the students will be able to use it. So there's a contrast as well, okay? Yeah, okay, so some different ideas there that we can look at from this one. And then the last one, if you look at this last paragraph, I might say, what's the purpose of this paragraph? How does it relate to the topic, or does it not really relate to the topic? What do you think? Why is this one here? Does it really match the topic of unusual commutes, or is it something a little bit different? Okay. Education is important, even if it's dangerous. Okay. Call for change for the sake of children, maybe. Yeah, right. So maybe we need to have some other ways, safer ways for them to get to school, maybe. But for these 63 million children in the last one, maybe it's not about how they get to school. Maybe it's just their ability to have a school close enough to go to, or what the local society says about different ages of children going to school, or different types of children going to school, for example, right? Okay, so it's on the same idea. It's not really about their commute, but it's about their ability to go to school, their accessibility of school. Okay, it kind of relates in one way, right? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so there's some interesting points in here to think about. Remember that this is for teenagers, this particular book, so maybe that point at the bottom is more relevant to a teenage audience. Okay, great. Okay, but you can see here what we've done is, by even though these points aren't part of the reading exercises, we can insert these skills and strategies to help our students develop these, okay? And just keep practicing them a little like this, and the students will get better with time, okay? Okay, now, tip number 3, you'll have noticed already that I tend to ask a lot of questions, right? That is my nature as a teacher. I do ask a lot of questions. I find that a good way to educate. Excuse me, I need some tea. But what do you think? Why should we ask questions during class? What's the purpose? Check understanding, Renee. Yes? True? What else? What are some other reasons? Reinforce learning. Good. To stimulate them, to keep them active and thinking, critical thinking, engaging the students, asking them to participate. Exactly, right? Redirect their attention back onto something if they're not paying attention. True, right? Encourage them to think deeper, test their skills, their comprehension skills, their reading skills, right? Yeah, lots of things. Good. Yeah. So lots of ways to do it. one of the reasons I do it, one of the big reasons, is because if I ask my students a question, they're kind of obliged to try and respond. So they're not just sitting there listening, right? They're actually being more active in the class. And I find that really important, as well as testing their knowledge and so on, right? But there are a lot of different types of questions you can ask. What are the good types of questions? What are the better kinds of questions? What do you think? Open-ended, says Christine. The WH questions, yeah, the W or the H questions, yep. Why, good. Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of different questions that we could ask, right? I found this interesting diagram. I saw it in one of our other speakers' webinars at one stage, and I've borrowed it, and I found the original source. It's from this book called The Q Matrix by Weiderhold. And it talks about these types of questions. And this has gone through a few iterations. It's appeared in a few different places. But this particular image I found with the questions, and you can see, some of you already know, it's got lower level and higher level, right? So lower order and higher order thinking questions, right? And it's interesting that I read of a study that was done where teachers were observed in the types of questions they asked during class. And this kind of group of questions up in this top left-hand corner, that was like more than 90% of the types of questions that teachers generally asked in any sort of schooling. It could be English first language schooling, like in the US or the UK, or in second language schooling like we do here in Asia more of, right? But much fewer questions were asked from this kind of group here. And I think the general idea that we want to do, these questions in the top left, these ones are important. They form a baseline for comprehension and understanding and basic engagement and things like that. But as time goes by, we want our students to start thinking about those higher order questions as they are able to do so, okay? Again, the older the students are, the easier it is for them to at least think about these ideas. Although I will say, younger students will tend to come up more quickly with kind of random creative answers to these questions because they don't care about being judged so much, right? So that's a benefit as well, right? But yeah, it's useful to think about what kinds of questions we ask as we're looking at a reading and how we get responses from our students. Now, I can see several of you are typing some really good things in the chat box. Pay attention to what's going on there too, because some of you know a lot of what you're talking about. It's really good. And it's really good as well to get your students to try and ask some of these kinds of questions too, right? Yeah, so Joey, I take your point there. In some cases, I think it's better to ask simple questions, easy to be understood by the students. But sometimes we want to just, can we nudge our students one level higher, right? Can we get them to think of something a little bit different, right? And we may have to rephrase that question a lot until they understand it. But once they understand the basic question, once they understand the form, like for example, who might question, once they understand the form of a who might question, then when you use it again in the future, they'll be able to understand it more easily, right? Yeah. Good one. But anyway, let me give you an example. Let's go back to this reading that we were looking at earlier. Sorry, my pen's playing up again. There we go. Let's look at this one again about Dubai and the special islands that they've built here. Okay. And let's look at the reading and we'll look at some questions that we could ask. So I'm going to start with questions kind of up here in the top left, right? So I could say, where is this photo? Where is this? And you would say, okay, it's in Dubai. That was easy, right? And I could just say something simple like, what's the weather like in Dubai, right? What is it? What kind of place is Dubai? Is it a hot place or a cold place, right? And then even a question like this blue thing here, is this an ocean or a lake, right? That's something my students can pick up. It's not really in the reading. It is a little bit, but it could be that we want the students to understand what this kind of place is, right? Okay. And then as we go through here, I want to kind of expand the questions a little bit, right? So we might say, like, how long do you think it took to build this? How long do you think it took, right? No, they might say, oh, I'm not sure, right? It's like, I don't know, 5 years? I don't know. How long did it take? They're starting to think about something that's not really there, but it's not a really difficult question, right? How did they make it? What things did they use to make the islands, do you think? It says in here, I think, they used rock and sand, right? Do you think they used anything else? What else do you think they used? If you were going to do this, to make an island, what would you use? Rock, sand, and what else would you use, right? And so we can try and get the students to have a little bit of a think about that, right? Okay, here they made a palm tree, right? So now I'm starting to go towards the higher order questions, right? It might be like, so if you were going to make an island, what kind of island would you make? What shape would you make it? You can make any shape you want. What shape would you make it? And why? Why would you make it that shape? Okay. And then for this one as well, another question, if my students are old enough and have a little bit of experience to be able to understand this question, I might say, now their island, look, you look at their island here, it's like this little kind of strip like that, right? And then another little strip like that, yeah? Two little strips, okay? Why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they do the island like that? Why do you think they did that? Right? So what do you think in the in the box, right? Why did they do that? Why did they make little strips and not a bigger thing like I'm drawing here? Flow of ships? What do you mean by flow of ships? Okay, now I'm getting into answering more detail, right? One, yeah, it looks like a palm tree, but is the way it looks from a plane or from space, is that really important? So people can park their boats at their house. There we go, Camille. Yeah. So what this does is, if you look right at the front, it's a little hard to see, but you can see the number of buildings. To me, it looks like there's maybe one road, and then there's one or two buildings. Whoops, excuse me. One or two buildings, maybe per property lot. And I think all of them have beach access, right? And that's probably something that they really wanted, is all of these people who bought these houses wanted immediate access to the beach for jumping in the water and going for a swim, having their boat, whatever it might be, right? Yeah, could be, as Mary says, it could be for tourists, right? And now we start getting into thinking about reasons why, not in the reading, but it relates to the topic, right? So this is other interesting ways that we can get into the topic and the idea and see what information we can pull out of the reading just by asking lots of questions and getting the students to respond. And the other thing I find, I don't know about you, but what I find is when I start asking my students these questions where they have an interesting thought and they want to share their idea, all of a sudden it's like they don't have a barrier to speaking English. They just have something they want to say, right? They have something they want to tell you, and it doesn't matter if their grammar is completely broken or whatever it might be, but all of a sudden they're more engaged. And being able to get that out of reading or out of anything that you're doing, I find is really, really useful. Okay, so by having good questions and getting your students engaged with those questions, I find it really beneficial for their learning. Okay, yeah, expression itself, Marissa, yeah, exactly, right? What do we do if when we ask, they don't answer? Good question, Teresa. Sorry, you're not showing everybody because you're on hosts and panelists in the chat box. But if my students don't answer a question, the first thing I do is I look in their eyes. First thing is, did they understand the question? Or, and I can see that from their eyes, or they've understood the question, but they either don't want to say something or they don't know how to say something, right? So if I can see in their eyes that they don't understand, then I rephrase the question. I try and make it simpler. I ask in a different way, right? Okay. If they seem to understand, but they don't answer for another reason, then I go back to my other classroom management techniques. I go back to my reward systems, right? And I'm like, okay, 10 points for someone who gives me any answer, right? You know, or something like this, right? Or I might ask a particular student who I know I can just encourage to say something, and then maybe say, okay, can someone else, you know, follow that, right? And do the same. Try and give students a model that they can follow very easily. So there's the comprehension barrier to the question. Try and ask it a different way. There's the want to answer question, right, issue, and I try and handle that a different way as well, right, by personality encouragement, my other teacher techniques. Okay, So yeah. Joey asks a really good question. Joey, you're not showing everybody, but that's okay. Is it okay to translate into the native language? Now, I know getting off topic a little, but your schools and your teaching situation and the parents' expectations and all of the rest may somewhat dictate whether or not you are an English-only classroom or you're allowed to use the student's home language in the language learning classroom, right? But if you have the ability to choose yourself, then I feel it's okay. And there's quite a lot of research which shows that it's beneficial to use some translation, some local language, home language in the language learning classroom. But remember, more practice makes you more perfect, right? So the more English you're actually using, the more English language the student's ability, their ability in language will grow up, right? So I would say, use it if it's absolutely necessary, but I do try and limit it. The other thing I do is, here's my chain of events. I'm just going to draw it really quickly. Let's say I ask a question and my students don't get it, right? I don't usually speak the local language of my students, but maybe I know one of my other students can help me. And I might say, if people really don't get it, it's really important. And this might not be a question, it could be a statement, right? I could say, okay, can someone translate that into L1, into home language, right? What is that? So that my students get the message or understand what's going on, right? Then after that, I would say, okay, so let me do that again. Let me do that in English again, and then people can start responding, right? Or if my student, again, similar process, if my student wants to say something, but they can't really say it in English, so they're trying to say in English, but they're having trouble, right? I might say, okay, can you tell me what that is in your first language, right? And again, I don't know what they're saying. I will then say to one of my other students, can you translate that for me? Can you tell me what that is in English? Then if necessary, I will rephrase or recast that with correct grammar if necessary. Then I'll go back to the original student and say, can you please say that in English, right? So their idea gets out, but I'm also teaching them how to say it in English, and I'm involving other students in my class to be able to show them that they can talk to their friends and figure out how to say it in English, or they can get other people to help them, okay? So these are some different ways that I do this with second language in class for questions or for other things as well, okay? Yeah, so, and sometimes as Marichu says, that you want to simplify the questions down a little bit sometimes as well, okay? Great. Okay, good. Now we better move on. We're starting to run out of time. We've still got some more tips to go. So let's take a look at tip 4. Authentic content, connecting to real world experiences. Authentic content is more engaging and stimulating. This is a statement because it has is. We feel very, very strongly about this at National Geographic Learning. This is our core, the research we've done, the ways we operate, the things we've learned by being a publisher over these years is this is the case. This is what we believe is a fact, okay? It engages students more, it's more stimulating, it gets them thinking, it gets them more willing to respond, like I mentioned earlier. Lots of reasons why authentic content is really good. Now, students' own experiences are the most authentic thing for your students, right? If I'm talking, let's say, for example, if I'm talking about something like the dentist, okay? It's less authentic for me to talk to my students about the last time I went to the dentist. It's more authentic to ask them to tell me about the last time they went to the dentist, right? Because it's engaging more of their own mind and more of their own feelings. And for them, that's more authentic, right? Also, I'm an adult. Generally, I'm teaching younger age students than myself, right? Almost always. So even the fact that there's an age difference in my experience and their experience makes mine less authentic to them, right? Okay. If I switch from dentistry to talk about a different topic, very little use for me to talk about the adult challenges of banking and finance and loans with my students when they're still in secondary school or primary school. They have no concept of what that means. It's not authentic, right? So always go back to those experiences that are the student's own real life experiences, exactly as Penny just said in the chat box. Okay, cool. And as I just said as well, draw on their senses, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, physically touch, right? Maybe what they smell as well, and their emotions as well, because emotions are really, really strong, powerful learning sources, okay? So you can hook into those things as well, okay? And all of these things create a lot of deeper associations in the brain, build your schemata, right, on these different ideas. So let's take a look at this one. Remember this reading, we've read this, we know what's here, right? Now, there were a couple of things in this one. I could say, okay, in this class, does anyone think they have an unusual commute? Do you have an unusual commute to get to school? Let's try and figure out who's got the most unusual commute in our classroom. And maybe I do this with some sort of student-centered sharing. Maybe groups of 4 talk together about whose commute is the most unusual, and then your group can tell us that one person's commute, and then we'll compare it with other groups, right? So I can make that a very student-centered kind of learning, right, or activity, okay? Another one in here, I see the question, Shamila, I'll get back to that one in a minute, is here there's some danger, right? There's some danger in some of these commutes, right? So maybe it would be like, okay, have you ever ridden on a zip line before? Maybe some students have, maybe they haven't, right? And it could be like, well, you haven't done this one. What about, have you walked across a broken bridge like down here? Or what about one of the bridges? Have you ever seen one of those bridges where it's just like 3 ropes like that? It's kind of like a triangle like this, right? And you kind of walk while holding, you walk on the rope and you hold the 2 ropes at the top. Have you ever done that kind of walk before? And you can get the students to use those experiences from something similar back to the topic at hand, and get them to think about that and relate to that. Now, Shaimala's question was, what if they are inexperienced or lack knowledge in the topics covered? Now, ideally, you don't want to have that, because you want to be giving your students things where they have at least some residual exposure or related kind of idea to what we're doing today, okay? So for example, this whole unit of this particular lesson is about schooling and going to school and transportation and commuting from one place to another. Now, students do that. They travel to school, right? So they have a way to relate to this one. This is kind of where picking your materials might be important, because I know sometimes we get a piece of material that's like, why did someone choose to give this to my students? Because they know nothing about this, right? I teach math to some students, and sometimes they've got questions about banking and interest rates and how much money do I make if, right? And I'm like, yeah, my students don't know how this works, right? So maybe I'll take those questions and move them away and do something a little bit different, right? That's on the math topic, but the real world topic I need to change to make it relevant to my students. So sometimes you have to do that. Couple of good ideas, as in the chat box, trainer saying, watching video, using pictures related to the topic. That's why we use photos in here. Gives the students a way of understanding and then relating to their own world as well. But yeah, definitely think about how you can relate some of these ideas to what the students have in their own lives, right? It's a better way to help them understand what's going on. Okay, good. Okay, now we're up to the last one. Going slow to go fast. What do I mean by this? What do I mean by going slow to go fast, right? I have found over the years of being a teacher, if I try to go too fast, it is self-defeating in terms of trying to educate my students. As a teacher, I may be getting through material. That doesn't mean my students are learning it, right? Just because I'm giving the output doesn't mean that they're receiving it as actual input, right? Learning does take time. It's not a quick thing, okay? You need to space out content to give students time to absorb that content. And also they need spacing to be able to retain content as well, okay? So someone said doing like spiral learning, right, is a way that's dealt with in a lot of curricula, right? Slowly but surely, yeah. So these pacing and these things are really important, as people are saying in the chat box, right? Cool. I think many of you may have seen or know this idea, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. I have a quick question here. So if this is time 0, I've just taught you something, right? And this is a time here, it's blank. How long until you've forgotten, in this case, you've forgotten 42% has disappeared. You've forgotten 42% of what you've learned. How long does that take? Some of you know the answer because I've mentioned this before. 10 minutes? 5 minutes? What other ideas or guesses do we have here? 15 minutes? Okay, you're on the right ballpark, right? 1 hour, okay, now we're getting a bit further out, right? Yeah, this particular graph comes from a specific experiment, but it is indicative of the process. About 20 minutes, right? By the time an hour has gone by, you've lost more than a half, usually. Now, we've been doing this webinar for about 50 minutes. Some of you cannot remember all 5 of the tips I mentioned at the beginning. You might be able to remember 3 of them, but some of you can't remember all 5. So in the chat box, what are the 5 things? What are the 5 tips that we're talking about? 5 tips for reading. What are they? Let's see what you can remember in the chat box. Asking good questions, that's one. Vocabulary, that's another one. You forgot already? Yep. Go fast to go slow, skills and strategies. There's one more. Did we get it already? Developing skills, asking good questions. Okay, the last one, we just finished it, involving real world experiences, right? Yeah, we connect to the real world. Good job. Okay, so, but you can see for some of you, you're like, oh man, I can't even remember. That's exactly what your students are like too, right? This is why, remember I said back at the beginning, I have on my whiteboard, I mark off 1/3 of the board. And then on this side, I'm just writing down all the stuff I want my students to know and remember. And it's always there and they can always look at it. And it's the way that they can trigger those memories again for themselves, right? That's an effective tool for doing something like this, right? So there's a lot of these techniques that help students remember, okay? So what I found over the years is the slow way, by slow, I mean the least effective way, okay, is to try and put a lot of information into the students all at once, and then they forget most of it, and then I need to go back and teach it again from the beginning, okay? So I'm teaching something, any subject, doesn't matter, math, science, history, English, whatever. I teach them unit 1, I teach them really fast. Then I teach unit 2. Unit 2, I teach them really fast. Then we do the test for unit 1 and unit 2, and they can't remember much, right? I need to, it's kind of like before we do the test, I need to reteach everything to them again so that they have a good chance on the test, right? Because maybe I'm going too quickly, right? So instead, a more effective way, the faster way in the long run, okay, is teach in small chunks. Give them a little bit at a time, okay? Give lots of practice on that idea as you go. Go back and review on these older things that we've seen before. Go back and review them again, right? Let the students try a lot. And this way, sometimes it seems really slow. Man, this activity is taking 10 minutes. We need to go faster. Give it a bit more time, right? Going slow, taking your time, letting the students try, giving lots of practice is the faster way to learn, okay? Right? It's more effective in the long run, okay? I think you know that. If you ever have an administrator or a head teacher or someone who says, come on, you need to get through this material, just maybe you can say, okay, let's make sure we're learning this. Let's build it up, right? Okay. Anyway, try and negotiate on that one. Okay. But yeah, so in an example, let me walk through really quickly on a unit. So the incredible places, let me walk through how I might do this, right? Very first lesson, really all we're doing in this lesson maybe is looking at vocab. And so on this, we're going to talk about the vocab we can see on the screen, and we're going to teach the vocab words, right? And that's what I need to do in my lesson. Okay, and I'm going to take my time, right? But to help me for later, then before we finish the lesson, I'm going to go and look at this and say, wow, that looks like an interesting picture. What do you think this is about? What words can you see? Oh, you can see island because that was one of our vocab words, right? And ocean, that was a vocab word as well. Okay, cool. What about this? What about here? What do we see here? Wow, that's big, right? Yeah, that's huge, right? Huge is a vocab word in the reading that I need my students to know for later. That's a huge tree. I'm introducing this up front, right? Okay, wow, that's interesting. It's in California, cool. Okay, oh, here's some more water, right? It's like a river or something like this, right? Do you think people made that shape? or not? Because they made that island in the reading, right? I'm introducing this idea really quickly to my students. Oh, and here's a picture of a desert in Dubai. Wow, that's interesting. It's actually the beginning of the next unit, right? Okay, so even though I'm only going up to here and doing vocabulary, I can kind of spend a couple of minutes investing in those other things, right? Next time, my purpose is to do the reading. Okay, let's start from here again. Let's review the vocab words. What words do we see on this page again? How does this person feel? Why do you think they're here? Whatever, doing questions and things with my students, right? Review all the words. Wow, is this an interesting place? Did people build this? How long do you think it took? What did they make it out of? Blah, 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 right? So reviewing all of this stuff. Now, we're going to see some of those same ideas and questions again in the reading. What did they make this out of? Did it take a long time? What did they make this out of? Did it take a long time? Because I'm repeating the same sorts of questions, my students have a much greater chance of being able to answer them, right? And this is how they get the practice that they need, okay? What about this one, right? Wow, this is really interesting trees. I wonder how old they are. How long did it take them to grow? Trying to go back to that grammar again, right? And looking at these ones again. Wow, is that a city in the desert? People built that, I guess, right? Okay, just keep referring back to these ideas. And you can see as we go through, trying to review old things, add in new things, preview stuff that's coming up. And then this way, my students are getting these little chunks that they can kind of start piecing together to build up their overall knowledge, right? Okay, so as Marco says in the chat box there, lots of spaced repetition. That's the technical phrase from psychology, and lots of scaffolding. And that's a really good way to move, through, zone of proximal development, Irma, as well, It's like having the students in that zone where they're ready to take on something new because we've been talking about it or they've been exposed to it a lot already, right? Great. Okay, so I hope that's given you some ideas for going through how to go slow to go fast, how to touch on lots of points as you go through to build it up. Lao Tzu, Chinese sage, said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The corollary to that is if you take a series of small, safe steps, you will get there, right? You won't get there rapidly, but you will get there effectively and efficiently, right? Okay, and sometimes rapidly is not actually the best way to get there, right? Clifford Thurlow from a book called Making a Killing, the secret of getting things done quickly is not to hurry. Yeah, I'm sure you've experienced this in your own life. Efficiency is doing it right the first time especially, or getting it done in the right way so it doesn't need to be redone later. Okay, so it doesn't need to be redone later. Okay, nice. Cool. Okay, so these are the 5 tips, just one more time. Building vocabulary. Pre-teach before you go into the reading, right? Build that up before the reading so you don't have to stop and pause and the students can work through it, right? Develop skills and strategies, even work on the ones that aren't part of your lesson, aren't part of your book, and just give lots and lots of short practice, right? Ask good questions, lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills at the level your students are ready for, right? Connect to the students' real world experiences, right? And take your time, work on things slowly, build them up, and it will be faster in the long run. Okay, so I hope that was really useful for you guys. I'm right on time. We will have some time for questions. I will answer questions and things as well, but just before we do that, a lot of people ask about the recording and the certificate from today's session. So if you are in the Zoom session with me right now, I already know your attendance because Zoom will track it. Tomorrow, I will send you an email with the recording and with the certificate. Now, if you're on Facebook Live, hello people on Facebook Live, I will write my email address on the screen. So if you have attended from Facebook Live, Andrew.Tiffany, oops, that's an N, excuse me. If you're on Facebook Live, please send me an email. Tell me that you're on Facebook Live, and I will also send you the certificate. That's the only way on Facebook Live that I can contact you. You actually need to email me first because Facebook doesn't track your attendance for us, right? Cengage.com, okay? So if you're on Facebook Live, drop me an email and I will send those things to you as well, okay? Great. These will come out tomorrow afternoon, just so you know. So if you haven't got it by tomorrow night, drop me an email and I'll make sure you get it, okay? Now, we do have another webinar coming up next week. 2 weeks from now, excuse me. Will is going to be back, and he's going to be talking about teaching speaking, especially again on this keeping it real, keeping it practical for the classroom idea. So please do check out our webinars page, ngl-asia.com/webinars, and it will also be in the email that I will send you later tomorrow with the links and so on. It will also have the information so you can sign up for Will's webinar as well. Okay, so I hope that was really useful. Hope you get some ideas out of that. Let's take a look at the Q&A and see what questions people have. So Saldar Min asked a question, what about teaching students something a bit above their level so that they can get motivated? Yes, that is very true. Sometimes, again, going back to that scaffolding picture, right? Sometimes as we're working through our scaffold like this, my student is at this level, say, and I'm trying to get them to this level, but sometimes giving them a peek at what's further up here, a bit higher than where I'm aiming, can be motivating, but it's not motivating for every student. For some other students, it's like, oh no, don't tell me that, I'm struggling enough as it is with what we're trying to do today, right? This again is a case of knowing your students, because some of your students are motivated like that and some are not, okay? I've done that with some of my own students. I will give particular students like individual things to look at. It's like, hey, you might want to look at this, right? And it might be something I do in break time, end of class, something like that, or as I'm drifting around the room, looking at people doing work or something, hey, check out this and see what you think as well. And I try and personalize a little bit of what I do to my students. Now, I know that's difficult in very large classes, but yeah, again, that's a case of knowing your students and helping the students the best way you can. So Sandamin, I hope that answers that question for you. Answer live. Sari asked, you teach many, many students with very low English proficiency, very low motivation to learn, okay? So Sari, for teaching reading to those kinds of students, you've got to, I think with any sort of motivation issue with students, you've got to find out there is always going to be something that motivates them. There's always going to be something. Now that something may be, when we finish this, we can play a game, leave class, talk about anything that you want, draw pictures. I don't know what it might be, right? But it's a process of experimentation sometimes to figure out what those motivating factors are. I'll give you an example for which I got my head teacher's approval. I would get my students to do some kind of work, and I knew what motivated them on their Friday night class was leaving. They didn't really want to be there. So I would say to them, right, we're doing counting points, we're doing, tasks complete, whatever it might be. And then I just had some sort of rule or system at the end where it was like either the students with the most or the students had got to this point. It was like, you can leave 30 seconds before anybody else, right? And that was the one thing that motivated them to work. Now that is an external motivation. That's not the best kind of motivation. The best ones are internal, intrinsic, right? Ones that actually relate more to the learning. But sometimes you need to go with that external motivation for low level students and young students, because it's what they respond to, okay? But if I've got very low level students, and I have had very low level students, and students that aren't initially very motivated, I play games, I be funny, I do silly things, slapstick humor, give points, stickers. I just experiment with lots of different things until I find something that sparks in their eyes, right? I can see it when they're like, oh, what's this, right? And when I find that thing, then I mercilessly exploit that one thing until it stops working. Eventually everything stops working. And then I try and find something else, and I just keep doing that, right? So that's really about classroom management, right? But for very low level students, even something very simple like just follow the teacher. So I read, you read, and it can just be I, am, teacher, in Indonesia. I am a teacher in Indonesia. I'm a teacher in Indonesia. And if this is a way we start building up some basic reading skills for low proficiency students, maybe that's what we have to do, right? So yeah, yeah, so these are some different things we can do to do that, right? Okay, I can see lots of chat going on in the chat box. I haven't been able to monitor it, sorry. But sorry, I hope that gives you some suggestions and ideas to work with on that one as well. More than happy to keep talking about that another time too, okay? I realize we are over time, so if people do need to leave, thanks for coming, but I will keep answering questions. How to teach reading for a struggling reader? Trang Dao asked this question. They're reading below grade level, okay? For me, I have my own personal views about this, right? School puts kids into grades and into levels and said at this grade, you should be able to do this thing, right? My own father was hopeless at school. He didn't want to or really learn anything. He left school as soon as he was legally able to leave school, like in terms of age. When he was at school, you only had to be at school till you were 15 years old. The day he turned 15, he left school. He quit school, right? He was always struggling with math, with reading, with whatever. He just didn't like it, right? One thing with that is, yes, we have expectations on people. Schools want students to succeed. It's a metric of a school. Are we helping our students learn, right? But I think part of it is recognizing that students don't always learn the same ways. I'm not talking about learning styles, but we don't always learn at the same pace. We don't always learn the same things from the same lesson. We pick up different ideas from different places, but reading, especially reading today, reading is not just words. Reading is images and pictures and videos and captions, and there's so many other things there. And if a student is reading below grade level, whatever grade level is, then what other things can that student already do well? Let's focus on those and build those up. My dad was rubbish at math and English and science, but he was really good at mechanical engineering, and he owned his own business for 45 years as a mechanical engineer and made a reasonable amount of money doing it, right? So just because someone doesn't fit or work within a particular level doesn't mean that they're failing or that they're not going to find productive use, and other things they're really good at in their lives, right? So with all of those things, when you've got struggling readers, maybe then they're not going to reach grade level because grade level keeps moving. But what can you do to give them one little bit more today, one little bit more today? And I feel, my opinion, based on all my experiences, is it's okay to have students who are not at grade level as long as we are still educating them, as long as we're still moving them forwards, right? That's kind of a discussion to have with your school, right? But that's kind of my opinion, and how I know in a lot of products like National Geographic Learning products and other things as well, there's a lot of scaffolding built in. There's a lot of things to help readers that are maybe not quite there yet, lots of suggestions for teachers to do. Try some of those different things, see what you can come up with, right? But yeah, I don't know. I've said a lot of things there. Take from that what you will. Okay. Good one. You can always email me and I can answer more about that if you really need. Okay. Teaching reading skills remotely, Wei Feng. So we're doing it online. So the question is, what did I do with you today? Right? I'm teaching you remotely today, right? There are, I've done everything this way. The thing I'm missing is, because this is a webinar, I can't get you to talk back to me. Best I can do is chat box, right? So when you're teaching remotely, when you're teaching online, there are gaps. There are things that are more difficult to do. But if you're creative, if you listen to what other teachers do, you can find activities and methods that substitute for the things that you used to do, right? I'll give you one example. Remember before, you may remember, maybe you don't, Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. I said about getting students to talk in maybe a group of 4 about who's got the most unusual commute, and then the group feeds back about the most unusual one to the class, right? In a face-to-face class, you can just put the students in little groups around tables and away they go, right? In online class, how do you do that? Well, maybe I can have my students go to something like a Padlet or a kind of a small group offline kind of forum, okay? Where as a small group they can chat, and they can write some notes there together, and then those notes can be shared back by screen share in the main room later. It's the same kind of activity, but my method is a little different, right? So in my own experience, I believe that almost anything you can do face-to-face, and by almost anything, 99%, you can do face-to-face, you can do remotely if you think hard enough about how to do it, okay? But don't think alone, talk to other teachers, ask us, ask people you work with, browse other webinars, look on the internet. Other people have ideas that you can steal and use to do these things too, okay? So Jaya, right? And try your best, okay? Okay, good, right, what else? Sustaining attention in reading class. So Rosa Marie, I generally keep students' attention by doing three things. One is I ask a lot of questions that kind of demand some sort of response, right? I give them time limits on everything so that they know they've only got a certain amount of time to get it done, and I tie it in with my reward system or classroom management or whatever I'm doing. But giving a time limit puts some sort of other pressure on them to get things done, okay? So that's another one. And the third one is I personally use humor. I'm not super funny, but I just play around and have fun. I be childlike, not childish. And in that way, I can engage my students. And sometimes it's like, hey, over here, come on, guys. Hey, right, okay, now let's do this, right? But a combination of those things works for me. But it is, I think some of those things are personal to your style, right? So, but yeah, maybe try being funny, try and giving time limits, try using more questions. Those are the first things I personally suggest, right? Okay, we got lots of other questions. I'm going to do as many as I can. I'm actually happy to stay on here for the next like 20 minutes, but I know some of you have to go. So we've still got like 390 people here though. How about extensive reading? Okay, so by extensive reading, I'm going to assume you mean what I understand it to be. Extensive reading for me is reading where the students do it because they want to. They generally do it for pleasure. And they're reading things where they know at least 98% of the words. Someone gave me that definition once. If students only know about 95%, it's not extensive, right? It's something where they already know almost all the words, okay? Without checking what they are reading, how can you motivate that kind of reading among students? Okay, one thing I used to do, I did this with my 6-year-old class long time ago, is I had a library in the classroom, right? Just reading books for 6-year-olds. And I tied it in with my motivation system, my class management system. At break time in class, we had like 50 minutes break, 50 minutes. I would say to them, okay, you get me take any book out of the library, read me 1 or 2 pages, and I'll give you 1 or 2 points, right? And during break time, usually I'm sitting there checking communication books or checking homework or something, right? But students would be, they would come over with their book and, I would write, okay, read me your page, go. And I could listen and do this at the same time. And if need to, I could check the page. But I'm like, yeah, good job, nice, tick, whatever it might be, right? And that way I was encouraging my students who didn't really use the books that much to actually go to the library and get more books. And what I would do over time is I would find the books that they liked to look at, and I would try and put more of that kind of book. And if books I felt, this is too easy, you're picking a book that's got 4 words on the page, I would start replacing some of the books, right? But through that one activity, it also got to the point where my students were grabbing books, and before they would come to me, they'd be flicking through the book, looking at the pictures, looking at the pages, maybe trying to choose one they wanted to read. And that was also, they're exploring the books more. And as time, that goes on to build a better reading habit. So that was one way I tackled it. There's a lot of different things like that you can try, right? Oriel, I just noticed your question in the chat box. Yes, the certificate will come tomorrow to your email, tomorrow afternoon, okay? So Marco, I hope that helps answer that one about extensive reading, right? Anonymous attendee, why is teaching the most important profession? I don't know, why do you think? Why is teaching the most important profession? Okay, I will give you one response to that. I think teaching is a role and a skill that comes up in many, many professions. And when you're a full-time teacher, you tend to get better at it than other people. But I've been a manager of people before, and one of my jobs is a coach. I have to teach people how to do their jobs, right? I have to teach them the behaviors that they need to do. That's really, really similar to what I do in a classroom with my students. I'm teaching them how the subject works. I'm teaching them how to behave. I'm teaching them the right way to do things. The reason I think why anyone who teaches in any format, coaching, my personal trainer at the gym, whatever, that one person impacts so many people, right? And not just that person, but the lives of everybody that they touch further down the line, right? For example, I teach math to students. One of my students is, she just finished, just graduated, grade 12. I did calculus with her last year, which she struggled with, but she still ended up getting like 85% final grade. So she did well in the end. She's training to be a doctor, right? How much will that subject help her and all of her patients in the future, right? Don't know, but that's the impact teachers have, I think, right? And so for every teacher in the room, have that impact, right? Be that person who has that impact on your students and everybody they touch, right? So I think that's why, there you go. There's a reason. Okay. Okay, we've kind of answered that one about motivation. We've done that one already. Tips for teaching English as a foreign language. Mary, that is a huge one. Come back and see Will next week. He's going to talk about speaking. That will definitely be one. Just come to any of our webinars, Mary, and you'll see lots of tips. I think we'll leave it there because there's just too many to say in the next few minutes, right? Anonymous attendee, are there any points about teaching online class on demand? Do you mean where someone just comes in and says, can you teach me something now? Or about ways and technologies to do that? There are a lot of, if you're talking about ways and technologies, there's a lot of good technologies out there, right? Like, I'm not going to name specific companies because that would be potentially promoting them, but there's plenty of things out there. Web hosting services, webinar services, there's free things, there's a lot of things out there you can try, right? But again, I would say just go explore what other people are saying about this at the moment. So many people are going through that process of learning how to do it, right? I mean, most of North America last year went through online learning for the first time, and they put out a ton of resources about that, right? Just Asia, I know, comes and goes. Some of us are back doing it again now. Look around, right? There are a lot of points and tips that other teachers have shared, and see what you can learn from them, right? Yeah. A question about the Sefer for the Look series. Did you say level 4 is A2? Yeah, roundabout. If you go to the website and you look up the program, Look goes, going from memory here, I should know this, shouldn't I? I think it goes to B1 up to level 6, and A2's, yeah, level 4's around A2. Yeah, that's round about the level. If you want to find out more about that, drop me an email, Nan, and I'll send you some more information about it. Okay. Let's see. Just for the sake of time, I'm just going to, because there's lots of questions, let me browse through and find the interesting ones, the super interesting ones. Yes, this evening's session, someone asked, this evening session is the same as the session we just finished. So I'm doing another one 7 hours from now. It's the same content one more time. Okay. So that's a useful question. Teaching reading to mixed level students. My approach, generally speaking, to any kind of mixed level classes is, again, number 0, know my students, right? Know which ones are which. Sometimes I have my students work in same ability groups, put all of my very proficient students in one group and my less proficient in another, and then maybe I can focus on the less proficient ones and give them more individual attention. But at other times, I want to put them in mixed proficiency groups, okay, so that my more proficient students can help my less proficient students, and that is part of the activity. That's the expectation of the activity, right? But I experiment with a lot of different things with those classes, and I try and figure out which thing works best for that class, right? So I mix and match a lot of those two ideas. Another example, if I'm asking questions to the class, I will have some simple questions for my less able students. And I will make sure that a less able student answers it, not one of my proficient kids who straight away has their hand up. I'm not going to go to them, right? I'm going to look at one of my less proficient students to give them success, right? And then I do have the harder questions for the more proficient students, and then they can get their challenge as well, okay? So it is, you know, wearing different hats on approaching different students during your activities, okay? So I hope that helps. Pretty quick answer, but there you go. Mark Horazan, that's quite a specific question. Can you suggest an effective strategy or technique in building vocabulary under modular instructions? I think you might have to email me about that one. I think I need to understand more about that question before I answer it. So if you're still online, maybe drop me an email about that one and we can chat offline about that. For a non-reader, Angelito, so if you mean by non-reader, you mean a very young learner, so someone who's like under 5 years old or under 6 years old. Yeah, those 5 tips I shared, I said right at the beginning, maybe the first 2 are not as useful because they're not literate enough yet. However, the last 3 about asking questions, relating it to their experience and going in chunks, those things work with very young learners in storybooks, not reading, but stories, right? And you can do the same things with those as well, okay? And maybe oral vocabulary, pronunciation of oral vocabulary might be the way you apply tip 1, right? So you can do most of it, not all of it, I agree, okay? Cool, okay. Okay, assessment during the pandemic. Someone's asking about it. That's really a different topic. We'll try and tackle that one another time. I know we've got more topics coming up about that in the future, right? But group assessment for reading specifically, you can get students to do reading questions, right? Students probably get used to using the keyboard. They can do reading questions via the keyboard to answer questions. They can do reading worksheets and use those as assessment. If you mean by reading out loud, reading, right, as an assessment, yeah, that's more difficult, but maybe they can record themselves on a device and then send it to you, record themselves reading, different things like that to be able to do that as well, okay? Links to future webinars, yes, we do. Let me get it for you. I'll copy it in the chat box. Jill. So this is, there we go, Julie's typed it in. But the one I've typed in takes you straight to the webinars page. But yeah, that's where you can go to get to the webinars and to be able to, to be able to see the other ones we're offering. It's got our ones through September up there at the moment, and then ones beyond that, they'll appear later on, October and beyond. Okay, cool. Okay, so many more questions. Let's see which ones are really about reading. Games for reading. Lawrence asks about games for reading. There's a lot you could do. If I just say some names and you can go and look them up, go look up popcorn reading. I think a lot of people know that one already. Popcorn reading. I do lots of reading with different voices or different tones, which can be kind of fun. Let's see, what else? What else can I think of? Oh, here's a good one. This one's not for comprehension, but it is for getting students to really pay attention to the words. And being able to like actually read the words and not just talk and pretend they're looking at the page, right? Is like reading every second word, reading every third word. So for example, your one was reading is something that our students find quite boring. So if I'm reading every third word, it becomes reading that find, right? So it's like just reading chunks of the text. Or reading backwards is kind of fun as well. Or in quite fine students, how that something is reading, right? And these are techniques to help the students identify and say the words. It's not about the comprehension at all. But those things can be a fun way to break up a reading lesson, as it were, to give the kids something a bit different to do, assuming they're younger kids. They like that kind of stuff, right? So try some of those things, see what happens, right? Okay, I am going to need to go in about 5 minutes, but let's see what else is here really quickly. When teaching online, any tips for getting lazy students to participate? Call their parents. No, let's not do that, right? Okay, but yeah, yeah, lazy students, there's not many. I mean, my own kids do that sort of stuff as well. I have to talk to them, right? There's nothing like your parent talking to you to support the teacher. That's one way to get it done. Okay, let's see, what else? Oh, Michelle, good question. Should reading be a separate subject in terms of making it independent apart from English? So learning to read and learning English as two different things. Now, Jody Crandall, who's one of our authors, makes this comment about learning reading, and some of the other professors we know say the same thing. English is a language. Japanese is a language. Chinese is a language. Korean is a language. Uzbekistanese, or whatever they speak in Uzbekistan, is a language, right? Tatar, I'm not sure what they speak. But those are all languages. The thing with reading is a skill you generally learn once, okay? Once you've learned to read, the skills and the strategies of reading, the comprehension of reading, okay, that's generally something you learn once. So in that sense, learning reading is a separate bunch of skills compared to learning the language. Now, learning the language, learning the character system, learning the way it's written, yeah, okay, sure. Learning to write English and write Chinese are different things, or to write French is different, right? But the idea of reading skills and strategies, it is kind of separate, and you can approach it through anything. It's interesting that when I teach math and physics and we have word questions, sometimes I have to teach my students skills and strategies for reading those questions. I'm not teaching them English. I'm teaching them to read, right? And that's, like, I get what you say there, right? It is, I think it is something you can kind of separate a little bit, but often we do them at the same time, right? But if you go back to my first tip, what was my first tip? Vocabulary and then reading, right? So teaching vocabulary is teaching the English, teaching reading is kind of separate to that, right? So have a think about that, see if you kind of agree, see how it affects the way you do things, right? Cool, okay. Wei Fong, you said, okay, I answered your question before. You said, I've tried that, but they don't use the target language. Okay. Did you tell them that they need to use the target language? Right? That's another reason I have my list of words on the side of the board when I'm doing different things. Sometimes they don't do that just because they don't know you want it. You need to set the expectation, right? So I will say, you know, when you talk about this or when you share your responses with me, you need to use, and I circle, one of these 5 words. You need to use one of these, right? And then I'm kind of forcing them to use the target language, right? Sometimes they just don't know that you expect it, right? And they go with other words, say no, okay? Sometimes they don't do it just because they don't want to do it. But then you have to, try and motivate them, encourage them in some of those ways to do it. But figure that out. Is it just because they didn't know they had to? Or are they being belligerent? Are they doing it on purpose, right? So have a think about that one as well. Great. Okay, one more and then I better go. I'm looking for the most interesting one. Enrich vocabulary. Online. I'm just looking through some of these things to find a good question to do. Okay, there's a lot of things about online classes here, and again, I'd love to answer them all, give my ideas, but try searching what other teachers have done, because again, a lot of people are putting information online about this at the moment. Okay, so there was a question here about developing. I'm just finding the question again. I've lost the question. Where did it go? It was about advanced vocabulary. I can't find the question now. Anyway, the question was basically, how do we build more advanced vocabulary for our students, right? And as I showed you when the going fast to go slow, I kind of showed you, okay, we do this, and then I kind of preview some things ahead for next time, and then review, and then today what we're doing, let's preview a little bit more. Sometimes I will, like for vocabulary, orally, I will give them a lot of words, right? attached to other words as I'm doing things, right? So maybe it's like, yeah, man, these trees are really big, right? There's such big trees, man, they're big. They're huge, right? Or maybe the vocab word is huge, right? These are huge trees, they're huge. Yes, some people would call them ginormous, right? And orally, I just introduce other vocabulary attached to similar meaning words, right? Or it might be a contrast word, right? So these trees are huge, they're not tiny, they're huge, right? And I'm introducing different ideas to my students that way. I generally do it orally because it just kind of drifts in, right, as it were. And then as they go along, then maybe we start introducing those words in print as well. Might be me writing it, maybe I know that word's coming up later, maybe not. Maybe it might just be, who heard me use an interesting word today? What was some of the interesting words? Oh, you heard me use that one, ginormous. Yeah, ginormous. So what does this word mean? And we highlight it for the day. Or here's some other words you could use on this topic. Here's Teacher Andrew's top 5 words. Boom, 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 boom. Here's 5 other vocab words that my students can learn for today about this topic. And some of your students will be like, nah, I don't need to know that. I'll just stick with what I need to learn. And other students will take that on and are interested in it, right? But again, learning happens when you have the opportunity to learn. So as a teacher, try and provide some of those opportunities, I'd suggest, right? So that would be for building more vocab, right? And more advanced vocab. And also think about academic vocab as well. Ginormous is not really an academic word. Enormous could be, huge can be, but ginormous is a little bit more of a colloquialism, right? So yeah, but have a think about that too if your students need academic kinds of words. Okay, good one. Okay, well, I better go. We've had like half an hour of question time. So I hope you guys have found it very useful today. Thanks for coming and thanks for staying. So many of you have stayed. So yeah, keep coming back to the webinars. Will's one is in 2 weeks. Certificate and recording email will come tomorrow. If you haven't seen it by tomorrow night, then drop me an email and I'll make sure you get it, okay? But apart from that, happy teaching, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for Will's webinar, okay? Thanks very much.